And do you want to do a roll call?
Okay. I haven't received any apologies. So if I just run through the expected attendance, Mandy Evans.
Here, Liz.
Joe Hale. Chris Holly. Oh, actually, he's just come on to say he has to attend a quick meeting with the leader, and he'll come back as soon as he can, Paxton.
Okay.
Paxton Hood-Williams.
Yes.
Yvonne Jardine.
Yes.
Jeff Jones.
Yeah.
Susan Jones.
No, we know where Sue is at the moment.
Okay. Erica Kirshner. I can see she's on. Hazel Morris.
Yeah.
Gloria Tanner.
Here, Liz.
Cyril Anderson.
Present.
Mike Day.
Yeah.
Mike Dirk. Kevin Griffiths. Wendy Lewis.
Here.
Des Thomas.
Present.
Tony Berdo.
Present.
Clive Lloyd.
I'm here, Liz.
Elliot King.
Yeah, I'm here as well. Thank you.
Alison Pugh.
Yes, yeah.
Louise Gibbard.
She's been having IT problems. I think IT are trying to help her at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Dave House.
Yep.
Amy Hawkins.
No, I'll deal with this, Liz.
Okay, thank you. That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. As you said, you haven't had any apologies for absence, I think.
No, we haven't received any apologies.
Okay, item 2 on the agenda is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. I know Chris would have been declaring one if he was here, but I don't know if there's anybody else. Item 3 is prohibition of whipped votes and declaration of party whips. Item 4 are the minutes of the previous meeting. Yes, previous meetings, not meetings. I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at them and read them, I guess. So hopefully you're happy with those, unless anybody's got anything different to say on that. Perhaps they would care to propose they be accepted.
I propose, Chair.
Thank you. I think I was Cyril, wasn't it? And Mike, you had your hand up as well. Okay.
Yeah, second.
Thanks. So I'll just get back to this my agenda here so I can see where I am, because the next item is fairly simple and straightforward. Obviously, with the budget coming up, it's an opportunity for us to have a look at the budget as far as social services is concerned. At the end of the day, we'll put together some comments on the sorts, which will then go to Chris Holly as convener for the Service Improvement and Finance Scrutiny Performance Panel, and he'll then coordinate all those together, bring them all together from the other scrutiny panels and take them to Cabinet for the meeting on Thursday, I think it is. Okay, who's going to present the budget in terms of officers? Is it going to be the Cabinet members first of all, and then Dave, or what order would you like to take?
Yeah, if we make some opening comments, Chair, and then Dave will come in then, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, Clive.
Okay, shall I go first?
Yeah, by all means.
All right, yeah, so I'll be quite brief, Chair, but so the report paper is going to Cabinet on Thursday. If I start with the outturn, I suppose, of quarter three monitoring report, where do I start in terms of finance this year for social services? With the current year, the pandemic, all sorts of impacts in terms of additional expenditure in many areas, which we've had to put in place to make sure that some of our most vulnerable residents are protected as much as possible during the coronavirus crisis. Coupled with a loss of expenditure in some areas has meant, it's been a really difficult year. And I have to pay tribute to two officers, particularly the heads of service, Dave and Chris Davis in our finance team, for making sure that we stay on track and really keep that tight rein on our finances in this difficult time. Lots of support from Welsh Government in terms of hardship funding throughout the crisis, and that prudent financial management coupled with prudent financial control coupled with additional resources from Welsh Government has meant that we are in a relatively good budget position going into Q3, and I think Dave will expand on that and take us through to where we expect to be to outturn, provided that we get all the finance that we've claimed for, which is in a positive potential underspend position, which is no mean feat for the directorate going through this year. So in terms of the budget and the revenue annual revenue report, and again, I'm speaking specifically here at this moment in time and across the directorate, and Elliot and Louise and Alison will come in with their comments, but you'll see that the report is projecting a uplift of 3%, and that means that real cash terms increase of around £4 million. And that's really welcome, isn't it? After a number of years of austerity and reduced council budgets, although social care has had relative protection in that and has remained a council priority, it has been really, really difficult. So that uplift is welcome. What I would say, though, is that at this particular stage, it is very much, in our discussions with Dave and his heads of service, we are very much in the unknown. Pleasing rather, we are seeing the indicators going in the right direction in terms of COVID improvements, and that through our workforce as well is all moving in the right directions. But still, things remain really, really tough. The things, the indicators that we see in the media, as I say, are all very welcome, but the reality is still a bit behind, that is really important to bear in mind. So, as I say, as we go through the year, we are going to have to deal with a continued COVID pandemic and all the implications of that for the next couple of months, particularly. But then we've got the challenge then of reopening our services and making sure that the services some of the services that we stood down through the crisis are going to need to reopen, and that's, from the first experience, is probably the biggest challenge of all, is reopening those services and making sure we get to those most vulnerable. We're expecting potential, an increase of people coming through our common access point and through our front doors as people come out of lockdown and seek to get the assistance and the help that they may not have sought while either they've been isolating or shielding. So it is pretty much of an unknown at this moment in time. So I think our strategy is very much continuing to keep prudent financial control through the coming year, and monitor it closely on a week by week, month by month basis in terms of where we are in terms of those extra pressures that come through the system as we reopen, and how we can use the finance to the best of its ability, really, and target it into what would be our priorities. So it's very much a situation where we look and see how things are panning out through the year, and at some point through the year, hopefully we'll have the ability to make some positive decisions going forward then, which will, but obviously the challenge is to maintain that core prudent financial control, I think is where we are, certainly from my perspective, Chair.
Thank you, Clive. You want to come in, Elliot, before I call David?
Yeah, thank you, Paxton. I suppose much of what Clive has said is echoed really in the child and family services. But I think one of the key challenges for us, over the last year, as has been mentioned in the Q3 report, has been around placement finding and the lack of availability and breadth of placements, which has then had an impact on and particularly with care leavers. So I think that has been a key challenge. I know that's been replicated across Wales in conversations with other cabinet members, and something that I know the Welsh Government are looking at. But that continues to be a challenge, and I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on going forward. But I think otherwise, the budget really reflects the aspirations for the service in terms of, you'll see specific things in there about, reducing our use of external foster providers and maximising use of Foster Swansea, but also enhancing the early prevention intervention offer, but making sure our partners are paying their fair share of funding for placements when that's needed, which the committee will know has been a challenge, as been mentioned in the past. So I think much the same as what Clive has said, but there are obviously key and unique challenges in child and family as well. So I think that's all I'll add. Thank you, Paxton.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. David?
I'll just check whether check whether Councillor Pugh wants to add anything. Tackling poverty now is part of the directorate, so I'm certainly viewing it as as that whole package. So I didn't know whether Alison wanted to say anything as well before I start.
My apologies, Alison. I hadn't noticed you coming in then.
That's okay, Paxton, no problem. And thanks, Dave. Yeah, it has been a hard year, no two ways about it, and not the things that we planned and everything have all had to be altered and delivered in different ways. From our end, from a poverty prevention end, all our grants are now in, and there have been uplifts this year, and we've seen, our biggest grant, the Children and Community Grant of 12 million, is in where it covers quite a few of our projects. But, additional to them, we've just had Employability have received an extra 500,000 for the hard to reach people who are even more further away from employment now. And we've seen these grants being topped up, in adult community learning by 39%. And so all sort of positive from a grant point of view, even though, it's a relatively small co-funding in the grand scheme of things compared, we actually bring in a huge amount, up to about 25 million in grants, sort of thing. And so, we, as you'll see in the budget, there is in the lifelong learning, we were looking at reducing co-funding last year, which we couldn't do, but are now this year. But that has been replaced and more by the grant covering, because we're having to redesign services to meet the needs now, because everything is different. So, so we're pleased with the grants. I know overall, normally we have 47 million in, and this year we've been allocated 65 million. So to tackle COVID and everything. So in many respects, we're very relieved our end.
Okay, Alison, thank you very much. As I say, I can't see Louise in as yet, so now I will move to you, David, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks to the Cabinet members for their context setting and introduction. I'll speak a bit in general terms, and then I'll be guided by the panel as to whether you want me to focus on very specific areas. But just a reminder, despite COVID, our plans for this year and the coming year are still seen in the context of what has been a 5-year sustainability plan, really, where we very much wanted to link to where we do need to make savings in the directorate, to link those savings with our preferred direction of travel around transformation of services. So in particular, we've got now 3 absolute guiding priorities. For children's services, that was and has been the safe lack reduction strategy. For adult services, that was very much around the our optimal model for the delivery of adult social care, and now we've got that third priority linked to tackling poverty as part of our prevention approach. Both the directorate and as a council. So our financial plans, as I say, we are into something like the fourth of that 5-year original plan, and now we've extended that a few years further. Despite COVID, we're trying not to get knocked off track from that. So COVID has thrown some obvious and particular challenges around how we support our communities, and in particular those that require care and support. There have been huge challenges this year, and those challenges we're expecting to extend into next year. But at its heart, our plans remain robust and still stand. So COVID's had some complications around that, and certainly some short and medium term challenges. But fundamentally, we still want to stick with the direction of travel that we've signed up to for some time. And that's important when we're thinking about the finances. So, for example, we'll have had several commitments that were already built into our financial plan that need to carry forward. We've had to manage them this financial year. We'll need to manage them next financial year, and then they're built into some of our future plans. And certainly where we've got savings targets, a lot of those savings targets are linked to freeing up the cash to invest in our preferred direction of travel, our preferred transformation plans. Elliot has given one example of that. So he's talked about, it's been a long-standing ambition to reduce our reliance, for example, on independent foster care placements. Doesn't mean there's no place for independent foster placements. There are, but we wanted to reduce our reliance, and then by reducing that reliance, be able to invest more in our in-house fostering service. So that's one example of where our plans in relation to savings, making sure we're financially sustainable going forward, linked to our transformation plans. And we have a host of them. And we mustn't forget that those things carry forward and are still in our thinking for the coming year. But we have had to make some changes to them, and I'll give an example of one of the biggest ones. And again, Elliot's touched on it. In terms of safe lack reduction strategy, we would have had expectations around the extent to which we could support our population of looked after children differently this year, which have been undermined as a result of COVID. We haven't been able to do all the things that we would have wanted to have done this year. Therefore, we've had to put back some of those plans, and there's a financial consequence of that. And we're expecting that to play through into next year. So one of the things that doesn't appear in the savings plan for next year now is a significant reduction in spend on looked after placements. Our judgment now is, no, we still have that as a preferred direction of travel, an investment in more preventative approaches, avoid risk of family breakdown wherever possible, keep people in or as close to Swansea as possible and living with families. Some of our expectations around that and targets, terrible language to use, but our targets for this year, we've had to push back next year, and we've built that into a revised financial plan. What you'll see in the savings expectation for the coming year are also things that have been adjusted and targets set linked to COVID. So we're expecting, for example, that where we still expect the balance of the extent to which people are working at home rather than in offices, reductions on the amount of travel, etc., reductions on the amount of paper that we use, all those sorts of things. We've tried to factor that into our expectations around how we will manage our work and the way our services run, that we've said we expect what we spend our money on to be different. And you have both a savings target linked to where we think we'll be spending less, but we've also needed to allow for pressures where we think those pressures will change as a result of COVID in the short term and going into next year. As Clive has explained, there is a lot of uncertainty around that. We don't absolutely know how that's going to play out in the coming year. And I'll give you probably the biggest example of it, both in terms of a challenge for us as a service and for our population, and then a lot of uncertainty how that will work in terms of our finance in the coming year. That relates to the care sector and our care of older people. So, absolutely, you'll all be aware, and I've spoken to you previously as the cabinet members about the devastating impact there has been of COVID on on our residents in care homes, not just in our area, not just in our region, but across the UK. So the situation at the moment is there are far fewer people living within older people's care homes than usually would have been the case, and would have been the case had we not had this terrible pandemic. And that's a combination of, very sadly, a number of individuals that have, that have been caught up in the pandemic and have died, but also the reluctance, understandable reluctance of people, at this point, wanting to, to move into a residential care setting, far preferring to be supported in other ways. We have always had an ambition to support people to live at home wherever possible, but there definitely at the moment has been a shift in people's desire really to to find other ways of being supported rather than to move into the care home sector. Plus, on top of that, in terms of managing, avoiding wherever possible further outbreaks in care homes, obviously the processes for people to be admitted to care homes are very different now, and that has an impact on the numbers of people living in care homes as well. If you put all of that together, the picture at the moment for this coming year is very uncertain as to how the care home sector, older people's care home sector in particular, what that's going to look like post-COVID. And obviously that's a significant area of spend for us as a council, supporting all of those individuals, for whom it has been the right place for them to live in a care home. We've got a great deal of uncertainty at this stage as to how that will pan out. Is it going to shift back over time, and that we'll see rates of admission to care homes similar to what we've experienced in the past, or will this be a long-term shift where actually we need to move even quicker in terms of finding ways of supporting those individuals to remain living safe and well, at home? We only have a certain level of crystal ball, I suppose, at the moment as to knowing how might that work out. The other significant factor is at the moment that care home sector is being enormously propped up by millions of pounds worth of additional investment from Welsh Government, which is being routed through the council, but essentially is additional funding from Welsh Government to support the care home sector, to avoid the sector just collapsing, as a result of the number of voids, etc., that are in place at the moment, and to pick up all those additional costs that care homes have been experiencing as a result of managing the pandemic. Now, I'm expecting that scheme to provide financial support, additional financial support to the sector, will continue in one way or another in the coming financial year. But I don't know what that scheme will look like. And I don't want it to look like exactly how the scheme operates at the moment, because it's to some extent it is causing the care home sector to operate in a way that it isn't actually right for our population, because it almost perversely disincentivizes care homes to actually take new admissions, and people do still need to be admitted, into care homes, particularly individuals with the most complex needs. So there needs to be changes to the scheme. I don't know what those changes will be at this stage. We'll be contributing to Welsh Government's thinking about that, but all of it adds to that uncertainty around quite how will things pan out for this coming year. So as all of the cabinet members have said, we're having to be cautious about, and ready to respond to how might circumstances change in the coming year. Given that I've given that as an example, I'll just explain what we've planned for at the moment. So we have planned for at the moment the same level of care home admissions that we would usually plan for in a given year. So to give us something to base our financial assumptions on. So at the moment we're assuming that that's the case, and we are financing our both our internal care homes and the external older people, or planning to fund to that level as things stand. What we haven't planned for is that the council would fund additional costs of the care home. So if there is additional funding that needs to be made to care homes over and above what we would usually do, then that is going to be reliant on additional money coming through from Welsh Government. So I'm giving that as an example of, out of all of the budgets that we've planned for and of all of the financial plans, this coming year is really one where it's been, extremely tricky to do that. We've had to make a series of planning assumptions, which, fair play to Cabinet, and hopefully Council sign this off. All of our planning assumptions have been accepted and actioned, and as the Cabinet members have said, that has meant that we have had to put forward additional investment in order to be as well prepared as we, as we can be. It doesn't, as the Cabinet members have said, cover all eventualities. It will be reliant on, if there are significant additional COVID costs, particularly in areas like older people's, the care home sector, we would need that additional funding from Welsh Government to play through. We are really pleased, as Councillor Pugh set out, around confirmation that Welsh Government have given us so far around a lot of the external grants that we rely upon, particularly to fund prevention activity, for activity linked to our tackling poverty objective, and that plays through and links to how we support people with care and support needs. So overall, I'm really pleased with the, with the budget as it is outlined at the moment. It has met all of the asks that we've made from an office perspective around where we think the pressures will be, where the demands will be, the proposals in relation to, where we also need to make sure that we are business-like and, efficient. They are a challenge, as they are every year, but they are absolutely consistent with our 5-year plan. So I'm very happy that that expectation is more than reasonable. We will just need to be, ready to be, nimble, to make changes depending on how this year plays out, and the extent to which the repercussions of the pandemic, play through into the coming year. And obviously, none of us know, exactly how it's going to work in terms of, the opening up of society, the impact that will have on people as well. But I'm confident that as your director, that we're as well placed as we can be to be able to respond to those challenges, whatever they may be. That's my general overview, Chair, and I haven't gone through, a list of things, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions there are on any of the things that are set out in the budget paper.
Okay, David, thank you very much. Very quickly, first of all, I notice Louise is in, even if she has changed her name for the moment to Fionn, but
yes,
pleased to see you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm back in as myself now, panic over. So.
There we are then. I notice Chris is in as well. Do you want to declare an interest, Chris?
Yeah, I'll have to declare an interest for my daughter.
And also Sue is in.
Hi, eventually.
Okay. Do you want me to carry on now or what?
Yes, please, Paxton.
Okay. All right. You've heard the cabinet members. You've heard the director. Has anybody got any specific questions? I know I will have one or two myself, but anybody else, first of all?
No.
Tony?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I understand exactly what David is saying about the balance of uncertainties, but there's a couple that I don't think I heard David refer to explicitly, and I understand why. I mean, one is the uncertainty that's linked to the statement in the report that says that Welsh Government are no longer protecting social care. I think I've got that right. And the second uncertainty, of course, is the outcome of the Senedd elections. So in terms of the extent to which we're relying upon further central funds from Welsh Government to deal with unforeseens in terms of the care sector collapse or unforeseen cost pressures and so on, I just wonder where that judgment sits in terms of the use of either the reserve or the other sort of elastic in the financial setup. I mean, I think I'll leave it at that for the moment, Chair, and see what our colleagues feel.
Okay, Tony, who wants to come back on that one? David?
I'm happy to give it a go. We do have a reasonable expectation, or certainly Section 151 officer does have a reasonable expectation that there is more money to be allocated linked to COVID from Barnet consequential and otherwise. So other decisions that we expect to be taken. From my discussion with officials in Welsh Government, they absolutely understand that putting us in a position, or putting the care home sector in a position of cliff edge at the end of this financial year, and the current scheme, the hardship fund, which has essentially picked up all the additional COVID-related costs to the social care sector, that can't happen. Everybody understands that if we had that cliff edge situation, that things would collapse in an unmanageable way, and there's no way that local government could pick up costs and avoid that eventuality. So I don't have any doubt that there will be a scheme, and there will be an additional funded scheme. I guess what I can't say at the moment is I know what that scheme will be, and therefore are able to plan, absolutely as to how we may need to respond to that as a council. So it's not that there won't be a scheme, Tony. It's not that there won't be additional funding. It's just that I don't know the details at this stage. But we'll be contributing and working with the Welsh Government to design that scheme and make sure that's fit for purpose. And what I'd probably be expecting is some sort of tapered relief over the coming year, albeit that's based on the idea that we are in recovery now, and that we carry on moving in the direction. If that changes, so if we had a significant third wave, or some other unforeseen, then it would need to change. But if we move in the direction of travel that we are at the moment, with decreasing rates of infection, stabilisation in care homes, etc., an ability to open up our arrangements in the way that we would want to, and would best support individuals, then a tapered scheme over a period of time that care homes can plan to, and that we can work with them, that would be what would work as things stand today. So that's what I'd be looking for.
Okay, thank you, David. Mike Day?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks. I mean, it's really difficult in the current situation, isn't it? A bit like running on sinking sand to be able to see how things are going to shape up. And so I think we would all want to be in that position of supporting and helping in whatever way we could. And it may well be that as scrutiny panels, we would need to come back to looking at the budgets on a more regular basis. But I have a general question and a specific question arising from that. We've heard much about the joint working between the Health Board and the Social Services Department in particular. How will that impact upon budget setting in the future? Is there any suggestion that discussions have been taking place this year, for example, on budget for next year, or is it going to be a question of looking at to the year after, picking up Tony's point of following the Senate election, for example, and we've got our own elections coming up. And the specific point in connection with the joint working with the Health Board relates to the mental health challenges that the current crisis has been bringing about. I don't mean just the mental health challenges for the clients that we deal with, but also the mental health challenges as far as our staff are concerned. So I suppose a question for the Director and the Cabinet members is, are they satisfied that there's sufficient headroom within the budget to allow for that level of increased support, which I think will be needed?
Who wants to come back? David?
Shall I? I'll pick up first, and then the Cabinet members can come in. So you're right, Mike. It's one of the things that has been just as massively helped us get through and mitigate as best we can the impact of this terrible period on our population has been that close working between not just the councils and the Health Board, but also third sector colleagues, and indeed our often our population directly themselves. That has absolutely been essential and has been a real step forward for us. We've always been a good region from my perspective, but it's really been strong working relationships this year, which has been outstanding. We don't want to lose that. I suppose there are things that both this year and going into next year where we have pulled funding much more effectively and much more focused on what's going to make a difference to the population this financial year, in extremist position, which has kind of proved that we can do it. When push comes to shove, we can do it if we're all focused on doing what's right and what's going to make a difference quickly to the population that ultimately we all serve. Some of that is being built into our planning assumptions for this coming year, and I'll give a couple of examples. Some of them small, some of them bigger. So, for example, I am optimistic that both the council and the Health Board will recognise the benefits of the integrated head of service role. Now that relies on a shared commitment to funding that additional role, and I'm convinced that we will. That both I'm speaking on behalf of you guys. Be better speaking about it, but I'm committing you to the fact that I think you're going to do that because it's the right thing to do. I think the Health Board are going to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's been that role and that that senior role, making sure and helping both organisations to understand where they can work most effectively together has been a real benefit. So I think that'll happen. That's one example. That's a small example. What's a bigger example in terms of financial impact is there would have been a real worry in this coming year that the lots of the regional funding we have, which supports integration across both organisations, was due to drop out next financial year. Now there was no way in a million years that we could have coped with that in the context of the year we've had with COVID and what we're expecting in the coming year. That has been extended to for this next year with a commitment from Welsh Government to look at what will the post Senate elections and then future financial years scheme going to be. I'm sure it won't be the same as it is now, but again, I'm absolutely convinced that everybody understands the value of that. Almost what's I'd say it's pump priming of helping the organisations to move in a direction of travel that they want to. In truth, it's not magic money, is it? It's not come from nowhere. So, if it wasn't spent on this, it would be going into individual organisations or something. But it's worked well, and it's worked particularly well in this region. And again, some of the things that we've done differently in this year because of the need to respond to COVID, we've actually demonstrated that they have considerable long-term value and benefit to our population. So we've already factored in to the coming year. No, we don't want to revert to pre-COVID priorities, not just because we're worried about COVID having a tail. Of course, we're worried about that, but actually we're both recognising, both organisations and other partners are recognising, no, our investment in those things actually is an investment that benefits the population outside of COVID times as well. So I know that's a bit vague, Mike, but the direction of travel around planning assumptions now just not being individual organisations making its own financial decisions, making its own decisions about transformation, they are now much more evidenced around, no, we make some of those decisions together, we'll plan together, and actually a collective commitment to some of these things it has the potential to deliver much better outcomes for individual residents of both locally and within the region. I won't stray into the political bit, but I can see that Clive's got his hand up.
Clive?
Lost him. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
And listen, very briefly, Chair, because I've got to leave shortly. But yeah, I'd agree with Dave. I think we're on a path to further integration where appropriate. That is certainly within this region is not going to reverse. And I know there is political and not. Certainly for myself and the leader and from the Health Board for that to continue. I think that the post that we created, the integrated post that Dave describes, has been one of the successes, and it's been worth its weight in gold in terms of giving that decision making structure and ability for both organisations to work much closer together. So I think we're on a journey which has speeded up through COVID, and that's a good thing. But we certainly don't want to unpick and just go back to pre-COVID for the sake of it. But I do think there's a will amongst all organisations, both organisations, for that to take place. So we will continue to pursue that. Mike, very quickly, your point about staff welfare is hugely important. I was going to mention this at the next item, if I had time. But Dave and myself attended a workforce meeting with 120 adult social care staff on Friday, and we heard some really moving words and presentations from some of the people that have been at the front end. And with the best will in the world, and this Dave won't mind me saying this, our ability to describe it in the way that they have had to deal with that doesn't do it justice in one iota. I think Dave started going first, and I followed suit in terms of the tiers that came through. But we don't understand the dedication, the commitment, and the fear that some of our frontline care worker staff, in particular, have had to endure. Now, we've got to pay that back, haven't we? So, in answer to your question, absolutely, we've got to make that headroom, and we have the potential for that headroom with the uplift that we've got as well to make sure that we support these people in the right way. And the whole of Swansea holds a huge amount of gratitude to these individuals who have put themselves well and truly on the front line. I would advise Scrutiny to, not scrutinise, but, maybe we can invite at some point another meeting to hear the stories, because it's worth every councillor and every lay member listening to those individual stories. So we've got a duty to support them. And I'm sure that Dave and the other cabinet members.
We finished live because you disappeared. Okay, in that case, yes, we will hear what you say, and I'm sure we'll take that on board. I notice, Alison, you want to speak as well?
Thanks, Paxton.
You haven't muted yourself now, Alison, have you?
Oh, yeah. How many times did I say and get said, didn't I? Do you mean? I know. Sorry. Yeah, no, not to repeat what Clive is saying, because he speaks with passion, and it's very, very difficult out there for people. But what I will say right from the beginning, from day one, our officers have worked so closely with the third sector. The relationship has been absolutely, honestly, astonishing, fantastic. Because we've been able to pull things together in unprecedented times and with speed that we could never have seen before, and we have the compact agreement with the third sector, and myself and Amy Hawkins, Jane Whitmore, and everybody attends, and the lots and lots of the third sector organisations sort of the money comes through us and back out into the third sector in the grants, but lots of them have had to change their way of working because of COVID. They've altered. Mental health, is very, very strongly sort of looked at out there in regards to staff, in regards to all the volunteers. There's hundreds, thousands of volunteers helping out there and everything. And I have to say our officers have done a really, really good job of trying to keep a hold of everything and use money very, very wisely into the best fit for things. Do you know what I mean? So just to say, Richard, what Clive said, there's a lot of people on the front line out there really have had a hard time. And yeah, and our staff, we need the support, and we have got in-house counselling services. And I think that, our own counsellors need to be aware of that as well, that people can be referred, you can take this offer up of support and everything, which is confidential. And maybe we need to promote that more than what we do, but yeah, I'm sure there's going to be the recovery period for everybody is not going to be quick, is it?
Okay, thank you, Alison. From my point of view, and nobody else has their hand up at the moment, so I'm going to say a few words now, if I may, and I will bring it back to a more mundane level as well on that basis.
I want lower.
Pardon?
Oh.
Basically, those of us who've been looking at these budgets for social services over many years now, I guess, will be very pleased to see, in fact, and I'm sure David is in particular as well, the uplift this year in terms of the budget. That is good news. I think it's somewhere about 3.3%. Obviously, there's an awful lot of work to be done with that money, and not just with that in terms of not just in terms of social services, but also in terms of poverty and prevention as well, because normally we haven't looked at that in the past, I have to say, Alison, and it's not something that we've ever looked at on a scrutiny basis, and perhaps it's something that we need to think about as well. On top of that, you are proposing savings. I'm very pleased, I think, to see, well, I am pleased to see, I know I am pleased to see what I think is very little in the way of any cuts at all. There is some working through some delivery of services, but basically most of it is associated with administration, from what I can see. And the only slight concern I have there, of course, is that you've been doing that for many years, and I wouldn't have thought there's that much left at the moment, but that's another matter. I'm sure that's something that you will sort out anyway. So I think from a scrutiny point of view, I would probably speak in for adult social services and child and family social services, and hopefully in terms of poverty and prevention as well, I think we would be very pleased to see the budget situation that you've got this year, and we're not seeing any major cuts in services anywhere across the piece. One of the concerns I do have, and it has been touched upon by Alison initially and by a couple of others since, is the fact that when we see a budget, we see a net budget, we don't see a gross budget. So we do not see where our income is coming from in particular. Now, there's been a lot of talk about grants coming through. I know that, I understand anyway, that today the Welsh Government has received another £500 million, I think, from Westminster, specifically for COVID funding. So hopefully that means that grants will continue into next year, should do. But I think it would be useful at some stage if we could see those grants that we get, not just the one-offs in terms of COVID, but what we get on a regular basis, so we can see the level of exposure that we have to grants. Because one of the disadvantages with grant payments is that they can be turned off and adjusted at any point in time. And if you're looking at terms of funding a service, then it can be important to know, to have that certainty in terms of where your funding is coming from. I think basically I haven't got a lot else to add except to say thank you very much to everybody who's presented in terms of this budget. I don't know if anybody has got any other questions. Tony, you might have a question that you want to come back on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I want to support what David has said about the staff. I think that's very important. Personally, I'm greatly in favour of that being a joint venture between the Health Authority and social care, and for that matter, the third sector, where they have a place to play. If that's going with the spirit of what's been agreed. The one thing that I would be interested in seeing, if this is not an impertinent question, is to see whether the committee could have sight of the terms of reference of the integrated care post. I ask that because the integrated head of service, I think was the phrase that David used. I ask that because in other parts of the country, going back years, these posts have either worked very well or they've been the source of ongoing irritation if the understandings at the beginning aren't clearly understood. For example, I mean, would the post holder have unfettered powers of virement between health and local government budgets? And if they're not unfettered, what would be the process of fettering them and of having them blessed, as it were, if we were swapping, for example, nurses for social workers or different care packages of different kinds in different settings? I think it might just be useful to have a look at what is intended. It may be early days, it may be very well thought through, but either way, I don't think it would do any harm to just run our eyes over it and add to the value of it, because I'm sure everybody's doing this for the best interests.
Who wants to come back on that one?
Yeah, I'll come back on both the points you've raised then, Tony, Paxton. So just in terms of you're absolutely right. You in the absence of seeing the income and the gross expenditure, it is a more limited view. So happy to work with the cabinet members to bring something back subsequently. Just to give you a reminder, probably we are in a normal year, we are reliant on something like £60 million worth of income, a significant proportion of which is, various grants, etc. I don't know off the top of my head what that figure is this year, but it's more likely to be something like 80 million that we've been reliant on this year, if I'm not being slightly underestimating that, and that's likely to be a similar figure in the coming year. But business as usual, we're reliant on at least £60 million worth of income, and as Councillor Pugh described earlier, the way we organise our services now, particularly around prevention, particularly around tackling poverty, are in ways that attract additional grant income. So that's growing all of the time, which is a really good thing in terms of providing, additional financing that we can, to the benefit of our population, but does carry that additional risk of, well, you're never absolutely certain about then going forward. But, for many years now, we've been reliant on that income, but happy to bring back more details. And then in terms of your point, Tony. Yeah, happy to share the job description. That is something that is, it's a council document. A bit of it it's been to council, but happy to share that again. Just in terms of your link to the finances, you're right. It's early days. That post does have responsibility for overseeing a joint budget, which is subject to a Section 33 agreement between the council and the health board. But the bulk of the flexible money in there is grant money linked to some of that regional funding that I was talking about. There is flexibility in relation to how that's used, whether what would benefit most is additional health investment, what would benefit most is additional investment in services that we commission or directly provide in the council. We haven't yet really moved to a position that you've described, but that's got to be a consideration for the future around, but how do we shift some of our core funding that exists within health boards and councils, if shifting that core funding would benefit our population more. We're a way off that. So some of what you speculate about, well, that this generally, that's an area that will cause at least irritation, if not a major breakdown in relations. I'd agree with you that's really where it would test our ability to work in the way that we would hope. We're way off it at the moment, but there are some seeds of moving in that direction. When you talked about who fetters that particular role's discretion, well, in terms of council spend, I do.
Okay, thank you, David. Just to say one other thing I made at this point in time, obviously we're all aware what has been said in respect of the impact of COVID on our staff, and I'd like to support the suggestion that Mike has made already via the text that perhaps you can arrange for some of the presentations that the cabinet members have seen already could be brought back to a full council, so that way all councillors can have the benefit of seeing that. So that's something perhaps you might like to consider, and perhaps the cabinet members can take that back to the leaders sometime to see where you can fit it into the full council meeting. Any other questions now as far as the budget is concerned? In that case, I will say thank you very much to all who've presented, both all the cabinet members who've been involved, and also David, of course. And we have got one other item on the agenda, as I understand it, and that, David, is for you to give us a further update on as to where we are with COVID in Swansea at the moment.
We can leave then, Paxton, yeah?
Yes, I'll say thank you very much, Alison, but
No
if anybody wants to leave it, obviously welcome to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Alison.
So I'll well, hopefully most of the committee saw the recent presentation at council from the head service. So that gave a general overview and update to that point. But it is I will update a little bit from there, Chair, if I may. In the last 2 weeks, we have begun to see some stabilisation of our health and care arrangement across community services and across our population of individuals who receive care and support. That does seem to be linked to, as we would have hoped, the continued decrease in rates of infection and transmission across our communities generally. It's taken a while for those decreasing rates to have any obvious impact on our workforce across health and care, but in the last couple of weeks we have seen an impact, and I'll give one of the most dramatic examples that for many weeks, at any given time, our domiciliary care services, for example, were operating with 50% of the workforce absent. And then just in the last couple of weeks, that's we've had far more staff back in work across the sector, and that's down to about 20% absent. That's still a high figure absent, but nevertheless, that is a massive increase in resource available to us to be able to manage care and support services, as best we can in still challenging circumstances. And that's mirrored across the piece, really. All of our health and care services are experiencing that stabilisation in the workforce, and that's very much helping us to stabilise the services, across the piece. Still fragility around, in particular, care homes. So we still have a number of homes that we deem at highest level of risk. I've talked about that previously with the committee, but even that number has dropped in the last couple of weeks, and what we're not seeing is, which we had been previously, that 1 week we'd have 8 homes that we're really worried about, and then the next week it'd be 8 different homes that we're really worried about. What we've seen now is there's a small number of homes that it's taken a bit longer to stabilise them, but it's an ever decreasing list, not lots of new homes, then becoming unstable. It doesn't mean that can't still happen. Of course, it can still happen, but the picture is improving, and it does seem to have been these last 2 weeks where we've really seen that improvement gather pace, which is obviously, a huge relief, and absolutely a huge relief for our population who are receiving care and support. So that's really good. I think I've talked previously around the escalation tool that we developed to monitor, effectively monitor stress and risk within community services. We've been at highest level of escalation since about October, and in the last fortnight we've moved out of essentially red into amber. Now, that is such that's a real milestone for us to have stepped down that level of concern, and that reflects improvement across the piece, across district nursing, acute clinical nursing teams, domiciliary care, reablement services, and very importantly the care home sector as well. What I'm anticipating will happen is, whilst that stabilisation is absolutely fantastic, it doesn't mean we'll become less busy. A bit like, I don't know whether you recall, I talked about this in council. After the first wave, it did, summer came, rates of infection went down, our busyness didn't drop at all. It just means that instead of us managing emergency circumstances, we start then to see that we need to pick up on, planned work, and people will be coming back to our front door expecting us to, revisit care and support packages, etc. Where the health service increasingly now will start hopefully being in a position where they're less dominated by COVID patients, able to step up more of their routine and proactive surgery and other treatments. That will generate business for us, in community services, supporting those individuals in their recovery and reablement, etc. So what we, whilst it's fantastic, hopefully not, a new crisis every day. I'm really looking forward to a period where it's not a new crisis every day, as are our workforce. It does mean that, still that huge ask that you've already referenced during the meeting earlier, of our workforce having to give and give more and give again is still going to be the circumstances we're going to be in for the foreseeable future. And frankly, I'm planning for that being the case, even if things go as well as they possibly can over the next year, this calendar year. I'm expecting that level of busyness, to be with us at least for this calendar year. In terms of vaccinations, you'll have seen that, both in this region and across Wales, we've done really well around meeting the target of the top 4 JCVI priorities being at least offered the vaccine, and the overwhelming majority being able to take up the vaccine. Importantly for us, that includes care home residents, staff working in older people's care homes, and social care staff across the piece, those staff who were reliant on to deliver direct front-facing care. So really good progress in hitting expectations across all of those cohorts, as well as members of the population in the older age groups and in the most clinically vulnerable age group. So that's good. We will find individuals that have been missed for one reason or another. So they've been caught up in an outbreak, or something went wrong and somebody didn't get contacted and they were on the staffing list or something like that. So there will be an exercise of going back and checking and making sure people know, who to contact if they should have received a vaccine and they wasn't an opportunity for them to get one for whatever reason. Plus, of course, our workforce isn't just a static workforce. So, new people are starting all the time. So that, we've got mechanisms in place now to make sure that those new starters are being picked up and vaccinated as well, along with new admissions to care homes, etc. And so all of that's in place. Really pleased with that. I did have, outside the meeting, Chair, one question from one of the committee members about concerns around people with a learning disability being able to access a vaccine, and also where those individuals perhaps hadn't accessed a vaccine, were they subject to do not resuscitate orders. So if they got caught up, if they caught the infection, would there be a risk of them not having the same access to treatment as other members of the community? I may not have framed that exactly as the question was asked, but just in terms of our position in this region, if I pick up on the do not resuscitate issue first. So back in May, we picked this issue up as a possible concern. Was there any risk that individuals without capacity would suddenly be subject to those sorts of arrangements, so they become ill and then essentially they don't then have access to all the treatment that you might reasonably expect. So we looked into those arrangements back in May. That was prompted by a concern, both a national concern and a concern locally, and worked with the health board to make sure that there weren't any of those kind of arrangements where people with a learning disability were, potentially discriminated against, I guess, is the, was the challenge, in that inappropriate arrangements would be put in place. Now, subsequently, the Safeguarding Board has revisited that just to check whether any evidence of any concerns, and from that point, no concerns have been have emerged in our region. That doesn't mean that, I'm naive and think, well, look, could something happen and it not to have come to our attention? But the question has prompted me to go back again, and I'll ask the Safeguarding Board to revisit that again, just to get an up-to-date position to make sure that, that we haven't overlooked anything. But, I'm confident in the work that we did back in May. I'm confident in the checks that we made earlier in the year, but I will, it's a really important issue. I'll go back and make further checks via the Safeguarding Board. In relation to the arrangements for vaccination of that cohort of the population, it isn't a straightforward position. Our expectation is that a number of individuals with a learning disability will have met the criteria in the in one of the four priorities, the top four priorities of the JCVI. Even though they're not specifically referenced, we do believe that numbers will have met the criteria and therefore will have had the vaccination. For those individuals that didn't, our expectation is that the majority would meet the criteria under priority 6 of the JCVI priorities. So we would be expecting them to receive vaccination as part of that priority group. I know, for example, that individuals with a learning disability that have been in essentially long stay hospital settings, so the individuals with most profound difficulties have definitely had been vaccinated in the top groups. I know that some individuals in some community settings, also at the higher end of the spectrum of complexity, have had the vaccine. What I don't know as of today is absolutely the numbers around that. But again, the question, it's a good question, and it has prompted me to make some further checks with, with health board colleagues around, are we able to generate any data that better gives us reassurance about, are we sure that we're picking up all the individuals that we should? I think there will be issues around some cohorts of individuals with moderate learning disability, for example, particularly if they're in younger age groups, not necessarily meeting the JCVI priorities as currently constructed. And again, I know there's been are ongoing discussions with Welsh Government from disability groups around further clarification about where those individuals, where those individuals should sit on the priority lists. But again, it was a useful question, and it's prompted me to work with health board colleagues to see whether we can get any regional clarification about that as well. So it is an area to be concerned about, and it is an area of focus for us. That's it, I think, from me, Chair.
Thank you, David. And thank you for the update. I think it is obviously pleasing, I guess, for everybody to hear that pressures perhaps are beginning to ease a little bit, but there's still an awful long way to go, and I think we fully understand that. And I think we would still want to be asking you to express our appreciation to the work that the staff have been doing set over the last 18 months now, virtually, isn't it? Sorry, 12 months. And if you could take that back for us, I'm sure we would all be grateful. Okay, in that case, I'll move on. But before I do, I should apologise for the fact that I should have said at the end of the budget section on this agenda, I should have said that obviously we have to report back to the Service Improvement and Finance Scrutiny Performance Panel on our thoughts on this budget as far as social services and poverty prevention is concerned. I must admit I haven't heard many concerns in the budget, but Liz will have picked them up, and we will send a letter around for you to comment on. The timescales are going to be really tight because that letter has to be with Chris on Wednesday morning. Obviously, Chris, you'll have heard what's been said to a certain extent anyway today, but we will need to respond and get that letter to you quickly. So it's going to be a quick turnaround, and if anybody wants to comment on that letter, they need to do it very quickly once they get it. I think it'll be coming out very quickly, won't it, Liz?
Would it be useful to stay on after the meeting to maybe if there are some concerns with some members, Paxton?
Well, we can do, but I think we probably have picked them up at the moment, and there haven't been an awful lot. And I think if we do that and set the letter out, and if people want to come back on that, then I think that's probably the best way to do it at this point in time. So the other thing, basically, because I realise we've got cabinet members and we've got David as well, just to say very quickly, the work programme is there. We will probably follow it, but if we feel that we need to make any amendments, we'll come back to you and let you know anyway. So on that basis, unless anybody else has got anything to say, I'd like to say thank you very much for your attendance and for listening, and certainly to everybody who's made a contribution, particularly David and the cabinet members. And if you and Liz can hang on for 2 minutes, Sue, after this meeting, and we have a little discussion on you, then that would be useful, I think. So thank you very much.
Can I thank you, Paxton, for stepping in at the very last moment? I apologise.
I know you did it deliberately, Sue. I know, it's all right.
Oh, gosh. Talk about panic.